Hey all, this is Erdtree. Yesterday in a video I went over an interview that Miyazaki had for Shadow of the Erdtree. And in that interview he said something interesting. He said that Shadow of the Erdtree would have level up elements that would level up your attack power in a way similar to Sekiro. And at the time I didn't really understand it. The interview was in Japanese and I used Google Translate to try and make sense of it. But the translation was awkward and made me think maybe there was something I was missing. Even though I asked several different people that speak Japanese, and they told me the Google Translate version was more or less accurate. Let me read to you what the question was and what Miyazaki's answer was. Are there any new elements unique to the DLC? Miyazaki responds, level up elements limited to the DLC have been added. It's easy to understand if you imagine something like offensive power in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. But apart from the conventional levels, there is offensive power that is only effective in the DLC field. This was prepared for the freedom to challenge threats that I mentioned earlier, and it allows you to say things like, this boss is tough, so let's explore another area and try again after becoming stronger. This makes it easier to experience even at high levels. On the other hand, by suppressing the increase in offensive power, players will be able to experience the challenge of challenging threats at lower level. End quote. So as you can see, the translation is a bit awkward, but I think I understand what it's trying to say now. I believe that they're adding this level up system to try and combat a problem that all the From Software DLCs have had up until this point. And the problem that I'm referring to is that the DLCs will usually be at least as hard as the endgame stuff in the base game, and usually harder, both in level design and in bosses. Now that itself isn't the problem. I want and I expect the DLC to be at least as hard as the hardest stuff in the base game. But because it's tuned for endgame, people will have their builds done and ready by the time the DLC lands. So beforehand they'll get to the level that they're going to get, and they'll upgrade their weapons all the way, they'll get the spells that they want, they'll finish their build. Their build will be finished and ready for the DLC. And here's where the problem lies. There's no progression in the DLCs to From Software games. The builds are done, the weapons are upgraded, the spells are gotten. You can still level up, but how much level ups impact your effectiveness plateaus the higher the level you are. When you're level 40, leveling up 30 more times is a much bigger deal than leveling up even 100 times when you're level 200. And so tackling the DLC, once you've fully upgraded your weapons and your build is basically done, greatly limits your ability to experience one of the core mechanics of Elden Ring. And that's the experience of facing a tough boss or a tough challenge and deciding, I'm going to go elsewhere, get stronger elsewhere, and come back to here. This is something that you'll experience a lot throughout the base game. The first time that you're going through it, the first time that you're collecting weapons and upgrade materials and leveling up. You might find a wall you can't overcome or don't want to overcome at this moment, and decide to go in a different direction, and going in that different direction actually will make you stronger and make that wall easier to overcome at a later date. One of the reasons Elden Ring is an open world is specifically so you have the ability to do just that. And you typically can't do that very well in the DLCs, because you're about as strong as you're going to be. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Now we need to talk about how attack power works in Sekiro. In Sekiro, you don't have levels, really, and your attack power will stay the same until you beat a certain boss. There are certain bosses that will give you memories. Once you've killed the boss, you can consume the memory at a bonfire, and that will permanently increase your attack power. In Sekiro, there were a few directions that you can head in. So ideally, if you got stuck in a boss, you could head in another direction, beat a boss that gives you a memory in that direction, and that ought to make the boss that you were stuck on easier. And that's the mechanic that Miyazaki's referring to in that interview. Let's go look at the interview again. This time I'm going to show you a different translation that I got from a better website. People were telling me to use DeepL in the comments, and that's going to help make sense of what was being said. The new translation says that the system adds a level up element that is exclusive to the DLC. It is easy to understand if you are imagining it like the offensive power in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. This is the threat that we have been talking about. This is for the freedom to take on threats, as I mentioned earlier, and it makes it easier to experience things like, this boss is tough, so let's explore another place, get stronger, and try again, even at higher levels. On the other hand, by restraining the player from raising his or her aggressiveness, it is possible to experience the challenge of taking on a threat at a low level." End quote. Okay, now let's parse this. Miyazaki wants you to have the freedom to take on threats, and he describes this as the ability to fight a strong boss, decide that that's not what you want to do right now, go to a different place, get stronger at that place, and then try again. And that he wants you to experience this even at high levels. The system in the DLC is trying to get high-level people to experience the feeling of progression that they felt when they first played the game. The next sentence says, "On the other hand, by restraining the player from raising his or her aggressiveness, it is possible to experience the challenge of taking on a threat at a lower level." And again, this sentence needs to be parsed. I take it to mean that by not engaging in this system, by not upgrading your attack power in this way, your aggressiveness, it is possible to experience the challenge of taking on a threat at a lower level. And that's very interesting. I asked someone who speaks Japanese, and they said that the text gave them the feeling that enemies in the DLC will have resistances to your attack that they wouldn't have in the normal Lands Between. And thus it would be more effective to level up your power with this new system that is exclusive to the DLC. It sounds like they're kind of equalizing the damage that builds output in order to accomplish two things. Number one, give high-level builds the ability to feel a sense of progression. It lets them have access to the feeling of getting stronger that they wouldn't be able to have otherwise because of their high level. And it lets high-level people not worry that their build will steamroll through everything in the DLC. I have seen so many posts of people talking about, am I too high level for the DLC? I'm level 500. What level should I be when I tackle the DLC? And this happens in every FromSoft game every time DLC is announced. By flattening the amount of damage that you do in this way, people won't need to worry so much about what level they are and whether they'll have a good experience. And because this attack power buff only functions in the DLC area, it won't affect the balance of the main game. I've always thought this inability to experience the feeling of progression was a real flaw in previous From Software DLCs. And I've previously proposed the idea of maybe giving DLC areas access to new upgrade materials and increasing the maximum upgrade level of weapons higher. In that way, people are incentivized to pick up items again like they did in the beginning, and they can also feel themselves getting stronger. But that was a bad idea because it has too many problems. First of all, people that don't have the DLC would still have no access to those upgrade materials. And you can't put them in the base game because the base game isn't balanced for you having access to those materials. Plus, people that buy the DLC would have a PvP advantage, since their weapons would do more damage. There was just too many problems with it. This is a much more elegant solution and fixes something I've been complaining about for years. You get to have a sense of progression, you get to re-experience the feeling of facing something that's too tough and deciding to go elsewhere for a time before you come back to it. And it wouldn't affect the enemy balance or PvP balance of the base game. I like it. Assuming it works the way I've described, it gives us the opportunity of going through the process of getting good all over again, even with our high-level builds. Anyway, that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.